let's continue on here looking at lists a little bit further, a little bit more in depth at accessing different parts of lists and splitting lists off. And one of the reasons that Gries suggests for that is that you can store different parts of your corpus data and then have it all accessible within a list and be able to split parts of that off. So continuing on, if you are in the book, this is on page 56. And I still have the list that I had already started. And the first thing that I'm going to do is actually back up a little bit. And so far we had not put the names on our lists. And so right now we can't access them. And that's one thing that he's mentioning as well. So if we do that, if we try to access it with the $ and part 1, we haven't put a name on there, so nothing. It should not let us access that. It's null. But if I go backwards and run it, the one that we can do in just one line up here, so notice we have now a list with $ part 1, part 2, part 3. And now if I try to access this list, part 1, we should get this vector. So let's try that and just see this. So if we put names on there, we again have a couple different ways of accessing it. We can access it as part 1, or we can access it as we did before with our double brackets. And when we do the double brackets, it's not a list, it's a vector. So the same thing happens when you do the $ part 1. Interestingly, it looks like, and I hadn't tried this before, so I'm going to do it now, we can do double brackets, and in the double brackets put part 1 when we have given it a name. Let's try that. Okay, so all 3 of these are the same when we've given it a name. So for everything else that he's doing, he doesn't give it a name. Since we can access everything without the name, I'm going to actually leave it as it is with the names. So the next thing is looking at how to access part within a single bracket. So this is again using the C to give us parts 1 and 3. So since we use the single bracket, this should give us the first part of the list and the third part of the list. So I would expect this to be this vector and this vector. And let's see. Okay. And it's a little bit helpful to have it labeled as part 1 and part 3, although I notice in the book now when it's not labeled it shows up as double bracket 1 and double bracket 2. So to see how that changes when there's no names on there, I'm going to go back to what we were working with. Do a list. So now we have our double bracket 1, double bracket 2. So when we take just the first and the third, it's like it relabels it because now we only have 2. So in this new one, this is the new 1 and the new 2. So to see how this is different from when we double bracket it and say the first and the third, I'm going to actually run it because this one is odd to me every time I try to look at it, is it just gives a single number, which means that it's accessed a single point in there. And I'm going to run a list and say, okay, if we're trying to figure out where did this take us, it would have to be to the first part of the list to the third element. So doing double brackets, inside the double brackets, it's like it, actually, he shows an alternative way to do that very same thing that is perhaps a little bit more intuitive. So I'm going to insert that up here. So it's like doing double brackets 1. So it's taking us to the first list element, and then it's taking us to the third part of that element. And these two are the same thing. So if we try that for a different element, this is again going to take us to that first vector. And if we say 3 through 5, we can look down here and say it actually should take us to the numbers 3 through 5. And it does. Let's try another one. And again, it's going to be that first vector. This time, we already are within that first vector, and we're going to put together two not consecutive 3 and 5, which is just going to happen to be the numbers 3 and 5 in there. So let's see. And there it is. So he has us try this with the second portion of the list, which is a data frame. So since it's a data frame, it's going to have two parts, and it's going to be separated by the comma. So if we say within the data frame, this is going to be the third row, second column, it again should give us just one element. And it does. Try another one, again in the data frame. This is going to again be the third row, but it's going to give us multiple columns. So it should give us all of these. And it does. So the next part is going to look at accessing, again, a part of the list, and this is again the data frame, and then splitting it up. So we have the data frame, and we're going to put this into a new variable. So this is going to give us the variable x, and x is going to be just the data frame. So let's look at x, and now we just have a data frame like we've been looking at. And we looked at split before, but what we're going to use it for here is to split this data frame by class. And I haven't attached it. So he shows it with class, but I don't think it's going to work without attaching it. Let's try. And it doesn't. So I think the way is that I'm going to have to do $$ class. And there we go. So the reason that he says that he looks at it here is that when you split a data frame, and a data frame is a list, is that it actually returns a list, and notice it's named it with the $ closed, $ open. So now we have two elements in the named list, y. So if we want to see just one part of it, we can access it like we did with the part 1, part 2. We can look at just the closed part, or we can look at the open part. Okay, we can split it. Oh, he's having us look at if we split it by a different column, it doesn't make as much sense. I'm going to do just y. Oh, y is off. Oh. Okay, so we split x and put into y, so y is now split. What I'm actually going to look at is x. So if we were to split x by part of speech, every single one is separate, so it would not make a whole lot of sense in a corpus or a data set this size. But if we wanted to, it would look like this. So we'd split it by x. Now this is interesting. What he's suggesting, I'll go ahead and put in what he has, and then see if I can, for myself, parse what is happening. So by the list, and making a list of class and part of speech. So splitting it this way has given a whole bunch of lists by this list. I feel like I still not quite parsed what's happening, so I'm going to take this part and see what this list is. So the list of class and part of speech, so this is the class and this is the part of speech. So it split it by those two, every one of those. And a lot of them have nothing. I'm going to go ahead and leave that for now because the situation just doesn't make sense to use it this way. But the point seems to be that if you are splitting by multiple variables, that second factor has to be a list. Not necessarily that split has to be a list, because this one is just a factor, but if it's multiple, then it's a list. So let's stop with that.